Hello, and welcome to this webinar. Will be launching the World Public Sector Report 2023 from the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Division for Public Institutions and Digital Governance. The World Public Sector Report 2023 examines the role of national institutional and governance innovations in advancing progress towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in the context of the recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. While the pandemic has made the Sustainable Development Goals more difficult to achieve in the short and medium term, it also sparked rapid innovation in government institutions and public administration. We witnessed a number of positive changes in public institutions and in the way they interact with one another and broader society, including through public service delivery. Against this backdrop, the report focuses on three main questions. First, how can governments reshape their relationships to enhance trust and promote the changes required for more sustainable and peaceful futures? How can governments assess competing priorities and address the difficult policy trade-offs that have emerged since 2020? What assets and innovations can governments mobilize to transform the public sector and achieve the SDGs? Today, we want to give you a flavor of the key messages of the report and its content. We will hear from Mr. Naveed Hanif, the ASG for Economic Development of UN DESA, and Mr. David LeBlanc from the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Governance, who coordinated the report. Then we'll hear comments and reactions from experts, some of whom contributed to the report. We also hope to have time at the end to address some questions from participants. So now we'll get started, and I will hand the floor over to ASG Hanif to share some key messages from the report. Naveed, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lisa. Greetings from New York, and thank you for joining us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to share with you the key messages from the 2023 World Public Sector Report. The report offers valuable insights into what governments can do to strengthen the role of the public sector in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which are an essential part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Good governance and effective public institutions are not an end in themselves, but a critical foundation for securing the transformational changes required to achieve the SDGs. These transformational changes will have to be pursued in the current very challenging circumstances, which include the lingering effects of COVID-19, growing climate stresses, rising inequality, slowing economic growth, and of course, conflicts. In this broader context, the perspectives offered by this edition of the World Public Sector Report could not be more timely. These shocks and negative trends, the shock coming especially from COVID-19, revealed all over the world the best and the worst about the readiness, responsiveness, and resilience of the public sector. The lessons learned from the pandemic era are fertile ground for shaping the long-term strategic and fundamental shifts necessary for the public sector to be fit for pursuing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The report clearly outlines that by capitalizing on successful innovations undertaken during the pandemic, governments can make institutions more effective and resilient to shocks, more forward-looking, and able to steer societal change in positive ways. Let me now share with you the three key areas for action emphasized by the report. First, rebuilding trust in public institutions. The report draws attention to the growing expectations of fairness within societies, which is partly triggered by the reality of the disproportionate impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, both within and across countries. So to address these expectations, there are three ways to build trust. Fostering greater accountability to the citizens and ensuring higher levels of transparency. Upholding human rights and universal values in public service structure and delivery. Lastly, ensuring public engagement, including through inclusive and participatory approaches in planning and decision-making. These three measures that I just presented gives us a very powerful message that trust begets trust. Governments can greatly improve their credibility with the people, including by engaging and empowering non-stakeholders in their societies. This improved credibility can in turn positively impact people's perceptions of the legitimacy of government decision-making, especially when trade-offs are required. And this brings me to the second key area for action. This is about leveraging synergies and managing trade-offs across seemingly competing development priorities. For instance, if you want to pursue food security, there is a possibility that the ecological balance is disturbed by land use and overuse of water resources. At the same time, SDG 2 about hunger has to be met. How do you balance these competing demands? And the interdependencies across sustainable development goals and targets can help drive synergetic approaches that push change across multiple sectors and groups. Governments could use a range of processes, mechanisms, and tools to realize these benefits and also address the competing demands. However, we have found the most effective way is aligning public spending with the SDGs. I'm not saying other tools are not useful, but this is found to be a very meaningful way of advancing public priorities. National budgets provide a critical entry point for policy prioritization. This is particularly important in the current context, where most countries face high debt burdens and reduced fiscal and policy space. A clear understanding of the relationship between public spending and sustainable development outcomes is critical. In the United Nations developed integrated national financing frameworks provide practical guidance for policymakers to think through the trade-offs and make informed policy choices. As of now, more than 80 countries have developed INFFs, and they are using those to plan their needs assessments and how to mobilize resources from all sources of financing, public, private, global, domestic. Finally, the report highlights the importance of building public sector capabilities, both for what public institutions deliver and how they deliver it. And I cannot overemphasize investing in peoples is critical for every society's well-being and progress. People are the wealth of nations, and we need to invest in them, especially those who are in the public sector. So what do we need to do to build these capabilities? 4 important building blocks: public accountability, coherence among different levels of governments, enhanced capacities of public servants, and last but not the least, digital transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, as we seek to accelerate actions to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the recommendations from this year's World Public Sector Report must be used by the decision makers to empower the public sector. Governments need to embrace innovation and ensure that public institutions are well positioned to pursue the timely and effective realization of the 2030 Agenda for people, planet, and prosperity. We are running out of time. Governments should lead in accelerating progress towards the SDGs. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for your engagement. And I recommend that you should stay engaged with the following discussions where experts will give you more details about the report.
Thank you so much, Naveed, for this excellent overview of the key messages. Some really key points there, I think. Put your money where your priorities are. Trust begets trust. I like that. Yeah, very good. So thank you so much. Now, to dig in a little deeper into these key messages, we'll move over now to David LeBlanc, who is the coordinator of this report, to give us a little more information on these messages. David?
Thank you, Lida. Heartfelt welcome to all the participants. Thanks for joining us today. And please feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. We won't be able to open the floor through direct intervention. So please ask as many questions as you want in the chat box. I will say a few words on how the report came about and what we wanted to do with it. To give a bit of context to the experts who will speak next. So as the ASG already mentioned, we all witnessed the massive shocks that the pandemic caused to public institutions. And this was very well documented in the first year of the pandemic and in the year after. So basically, the pandemic exposed severe gaps of trust, as been mentioned. It also revealed institutional weaknesses affecting the coherence of policy across sectors and across levels of government. And it also exposed weaknesses in critical functions of governments, including risk management, crisis preparedness, communication with the public, science policy interface, transparency, and accountability. Yet, during the pandemic, by necessity, public institutions across the world had to experiment and innovate. In some sectors, we saw drastic changes. For example, the shift to online teaching and learning, with both positive and negative impacts. New ways of delivering critical public services were found through collaboration with non-state actors. Tools were mobilized by a range of actors to maintain and expand transparency and accountability around key actions of government, including the use of public funds and policy changes that impacted human rights and civic space. So our starting point was how can we give a sense of this and highlight positive institutional changes that took place during the pandemic and their potential for the future. So we quickly came up with the 3 main areas that Lisa mentioned at the beginning, looking at the changes in the relationships between people and governments, how the pandemic had shed new light on SDG trade-offs, and how those could be better addressed, and what positive changes have taken place in the working processes of public institutions and in the way they deliver public services. And to address these topics, we felt that we needed a broad range of voices and expertise. And this is why we adopted a new model for the report. The report is here, by the way. You will be able to see it. Oh, yeah, okay, maybe it doesn't come clear. So for each chapter, you will find a short overview written by DPIDG staff, and from 6 to 9 short targeted contributions from experts who address selected subtopics covering different sectors, countries, and policy processes. The goal for us was to get as concrete insights and recommendations as possible. I want to express our most sincere thanks to the 38 experts who contributed to the report and who all accepted to play the game and follow the specifications we gave them. I believe that these expert contributions make the report not only more informed and relevant, but also easy to read. We will hear from a panel of experts shortly, and maybe they will tell us whether the final product matches our initial expectations. But before going there, I would like to highlight a few key common threads that emerge from the set of contributions as a whole. The first thread is about change expectations of people and societies with regard to the objective and practices of governance. And we heard about this from ASG and IF. The second thread is the need for increased participation and engagement at all levels. The report includes examples that illustrate how enhanced participation and engagement delivered social benefits during the pandemic, and how they could enhance societal outcomes in the future. What was striking to me is that these examples cover the full spectrum of participation, from information to consultation to collaboration, and ultimately to empowerment. A third thread is the need to change the modes of operation of the public sector to allow public institutions to deal with crises, while at the same time remaining focusing on longer-term goals. And this requires better coordination and collaboration across government, both horizontally and vertically. But it also implies to rethink the way public services are delivered, focusing on people, users, and beneficiaries rather than bureaucratic structures and processes. And of course, it means to equip public administration and public institutions with the tools to better navigate the trade-offs that arise in SDG implementation. So in a nutshell, as public institutions shift from working on the basis of ad hoc temporary changes that were put in place during the pandemic to more sustained modes of operating, there is really an opportunity to think about transforming public institutions in a holistic way. Fourth, governments need to manage a digital transformation, as ASG and IF said. The accelerated shift to digital government since 2020 has provided new opportunities and benefits, but also has heightened risks and generated new challenges. Governments have the chance to leverage digital transformation in a way that puts human rights, inclusion, and the imperative to leave no one behind at the center, and relevant policies should allow innovation to flourish while protecting the rights of users and ensuring that digital services are secure and equitable, taking into consideration the effect of the growing digital divide on the most vulnerable. My fifth and last point is about how to foster innovation in public administration. During the pandemic, we saw occurrences of increased collaboration among public servants and other stakeholders, and in some cases, also an accelerated pace of innovation. Preserving and building on this momentum, however, will require proper institutionalization of ad hoc initiatives. That is, translating them into processes and standard operating procedures of the public institutions. And this is always a challenge. Some of the positive changes we have seen may not be sustained going forward as policies and processes revert back to pre-pandemic default position. And in some cases, the driving factor behind positive changes may have been the intrinsic motivation of public servants, civil society, and individuals. And whether and how such motivation can be sustained post-pandemic should now, I think, be of key concern to governments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. That was very helpful introduction and digging a little deeper into those important messages. I just want to remind participants, we will have time at the end to address some of your questions. So please feel free to put them into the chat and we'll compile them all and answer them at the end of the presentations by the experts. So now I'd like to turn over to our 4 distinguished experts for their views, feedback, and comments on the report. I just want to ask you to be mindful of the time. You have about 5 minutes each. Sorry for the short time. I know you could talk a lot longer, but we do want to allow time at the end to get to the questions from the participants. We already have several that have come in. So yeah, just please try to keep it to 5 minutes. Our first expert today is Ms. Muge Finkel, co-director of the Gender Inequality Research Lab at the University of Pittsburgh. She co-authored a contribution for the report on gender equality in public administration, which is in the first chapter. Ms. Finkel, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and congratulations again to the entire UN DESA team for producing this most comprehensive body of work and opening space for governments to learn to reinvent themselves. Our focus at GIRL has been on gender equality, as you've just heard, and we spent the past 8 years trying to figure out the ins and outs of how to get public institutions to a more diverse and gender equal space. So today, within my 5 minutes, I thought I would speak very briefly on what we knew about gender equality in public institutions prior to pandemic, what we have learned since, and conclude with a few highlights for our commitment to achieve the 2030 Development Agenda. Before COVID-19, we had started reporting a growing body of evidence pointing to the positive effect of gender equality and improved government functioning, responsiveness, and effectiveness of service delivery, along with improved trust in public institutions. We also affirmed our commitment to gender equality across all levels and sectors of public administration within the framework of the 2030 Development Agenda and agreed on measuring progress with the SDG indicator 16.7.1b. With increased data availability, we celebrated the fact that globally gender parity among civil servants was within reach, with women's participation averaging 46% at the end of 2020. But we also identified significant and persistent gender gaps, especially in fragile and conflict-affected countries and across certain sectors of public policy, such as environmental protection ministries. Perhaps least surprisingly, we found that women around the world continue to be underrepresented in decision-making levels in their public institutions. The first lesson of the pandemic was that even under strict social distancing measures, not only essential public services had to continue, but governments had to find ways to deliver them more effectively and urgently, while also attending to the needs of their employees. In the short term, governments, much like other workspaces, offered workplace adjustments, shifted to remote and hybrid work, and paid greater attention to work-life balance and acknowledged the importance of unpaid care work. In the long term, though, they discovered that they can and need to intentionally integrate gender equality concerns to information infrastructure, access to technology, while also investing in mental health, as well as the managerial training of their employees to cultivate a new leadership approach. Our expert contribution to the report, we argue that all of these promising innovations that were adopted in response to the pandemic need to be sustained. These innovations need to become permanent features of public administration workspace if we are serious about making sure women are able and willing to participate equally across all sectors and all ranks of public policymaking. The COVID-19 pandemic also revealed and even exacerbated systemic impediments to gender equality in public institutions, the most important one being the lack of women in leadership positions. For example, while women make up 70% of healthcare workforce and were the majority of first responders, in public health administration, they account for only 34% of decision makers. This disparity was most starkly evident in the COVID-19 task forces. As governments rushed to create these executive branch institutions and task them to lead government pandemic responses, they often failed to include women equitably. As a result, men made up 76% of COVID task force members and held 78% of the leadership positions. From what we knew prior to pandemic on gender equality in public institutions and what we experienced during, we believe we have 3 important lessons to carry forward in order to continue to progress towards the 2030 development agenda. First, we must recommit to collecting, analyzing, and utilizing better sex desegregated data across our public institutions. We agreed to elevate SDG indicator 16.7.1b to a tier 2 indicator in 2020. Reporting on this indicator is a must and has the potential to help us target innovations to better promote a more diverse and inclusive public sector. Second, there is a lot we know about crises, past and future. We know they're part of our new normal, be it climate-related or government-generated. We know that periods of crisis destabilize existing institutional structures and create new leadership possibilities. We also know that the more gender diverse and inclusive leadership is, the more effective and accountable their policy responses are. Therefore, we need to encourage governments to think ahead, prioritize gender equality in crisis, readiness, response, and management mechanisms across all sectors in their public institutions. Finally, we must affirm our commitment to innovate public institutions to become exemplary gender equal workspaces. We must commit to gender equality in public institutions as a goal in its own right, and then appreciate its contributions to all SDGs. We must be unwilling to let gender equality principles be sidelined during the next crisis, as we did during COVID-19. Because one sure lesson we have now is that our ability to enact effective public policies and increase public's trust in their public institutions depends on our ability and foresight to include women in our public decision-making bodies. With that, I yield my time, and thank you very much again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Finkel, for these excellent points, and thank you for sticking to your time. Now we'll turn to our next expert, Rolf Alter. It's my pleasure to give him the floor. He teaches at the Hertie School in Berlin, and he was the Director of Public Governance at OECD, and is a member of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration. He also contributed to the report. Mr. Alter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you very much, Mr. Henry, for the presentation. And I'd like to join the congratulations to David and his team for an excellent report. I thought I'd use the few minutes just to illustrate what already has been said are the main lines of both research, but also of results and recommendations of the report. My first point refers to technology in the area of justice. Definitely, justice systems are critically and not by chance mentioned as key in our goal 16 on the how to make the SDGs actually work and provide and produce the results. E-justice is not just an improvement in terms of the structure. It has to be really thought as something much bigger than that. Putting the current system online would certainly not be sufficient. But as Sarah McCoubrey, in one of her contributions, pointed out so sharply, there is an appetite for change in justice systems. And the principles that have to be really observed in the future with the help of technology would be right-centered, transparent, and certainly also accountable to people who are looking for results and settlement of their disputes. And I think we could not only, I would like to really underline the contribution that a functioning justice system will make directly and indirectly to trust in government. And that means it's a contribution to all of the SDGs because it will help and facilitate policy making and implementation for most, if not all, for the SDGs that we are pursuing. There are very nice examples, by the way. I think it's worthwhile to check what has been presented by Sarah in her contribution. Very interesting examples. They are not just referring to the learnings of the COVID crisis and the justice system where courthouses were closed. There is much more on good examples in Morocco, for example, and in other countries that are worthwhile to look at. My second point, again, very much related to the SDG 16, a tension that we live through these days nearly every day, meaning calculating, evaluating trade-offs and synergies and citizens. And there are factors that could increase. One of them is certainly the idea that participation, part of this new relationship between government and citizen, that this relationship would be much better if we had participation from stakeholders. There is, again, a very interesting contribution by Olga Norheim in the report, which I think points out extremely well that participation of stakeholders is a complex, challenging process to bring the right people at the table, to have a good agenda, to have the right format, not relying only on technology to interact. All of that, definitely good advice and interesting examples from many countries, whether it's UK or it's Ireland, or I could mention France or Germany. All of these countries try to do something. But I will say, and that's my point at the end of this illustration, recently there was an interesting survey that's now carried out by the OECD across all the member countries, a survey on trust, standardized questions, and so on. And one of the striking results was that citizens actually are interested to join these councils and these groups of participation, but they have a doubt whether government actually follows their recommendations and takes the findings of these participatory processes serious. So I think this is a very good recommendation for the future, that it's not just the process itself, it's what is being done by government with the recommendations and the results that will determine the degree of trust that citizens bring with them when they want to engage in these participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Alter. Very interesting points, very relevant. Now we'll turn to our third expert, Alqueta Pesce, who works at the Brazilian School of Public Business Administration, the Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and is a member of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Public Administration. Ms. Pesce, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to comment on the report and the invitation of David to participate in this meeting. I focused my observations in two main points. The first one related to the continuity of a significant change in how state and public institutions see their role and how they should interface with citizens that emerge from the pandemic. And I believe that we had with the pandemic focus, motivation, and momentum to public institutions and how they relate with each other, and as well as with their constituencies. This momentum and motivation urged for innovative solutions and also legitimate those solutions, sometimes overcoming the traditional burdens of the public sector. However, I'm afraid that the context of polycrising gives stresses in an opposite directions. We lose the motivations faced with multiple crises. Public servants, public institutions may lose the momentum and the necessary motivation to overcome the barriers to experiment and innovate. And this is a major concerns that I think we all need to face. So how to sustain the momentum of innovation in public administration once these particular circumstances of the pandemic are not here anymore? I highlighted some key points that emerged from my reading of the report. First of all, focus on incremental innovations that already build upon legitimate and effective tested innovative solutions in place. And I mean by legitimate, socially accepted, and effective in terms of service delivery and outcomes. These innovations that are already working well and count on broader social support may refer to, for example, the conditional cash programs that were used during the pandemic to increase the network of social and health support, and may be today bundled with other additional innovative solutions, for example, embracing energy subsidies or bundled with affirmative action programs. 2, co-creation needs to be ingrained or co-implementation of innovative solutions. So linking, co-design, co-implementation with accountable and effective service delivery is the right way. 3, government need to strengthen institutional elements such as regulatory frameworks, inter-organizational frameworks, and networks that actually enable partnerships, co-production arrangements, as well as alternative forms of service delivery that sustain innovation during the pandemic and beyond the pandemic. 4, there is a focus on public sector workforce, but this focus needs to go beyond the need to enhance culture, mindsets, capabilities, and tools to tackle innovations. I do think that we need to pay more attention on the discretion and managerial flexibility. This is lacking from our current frameworks. 5, the need to enhance digital capacities in multiple forms, going through a more focused approach, using and relying on policy learning and evidence. And I specifically refer to enhancing regulatory framework of digital technology, avoiding biases in digital decision-making processes, avoiding data centralization or inadequate forms of control that also may come with digital technology, narrow digital skills, not just for the old elderly populations, like such as the elderly, but also within the public sector workforce, particularly investing in data literacy at the highest decision-making levels within the public sector workforce, innovating in access in order to diminish the digital divide, and maintain and improve blended channels of service delivery with a focus on integration and interoperability of digital and non-digital systems. Last but not least, I do think that audit institutions can serve as catalyzers of policy learning, going beyond the audit control function. This also includes enhancing forms of social accountability and partnerships with society and social organizations. This policy learning cycle may foster the link between public spending and policy innovation for SDGs. And I do think that this is important in order to include all the policy cycle, the institutional policy cycle for policy innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pesce. Now we're going to turn to our fourth expert, Margaret Williams. Ms. Williams is Associate Director for SDG 16+ at the Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. She's worked on SDG 16 since the adoption of the SDGs and brings to the debate the perspective of civil society, which has been very active on this front. Ms. Williams, please, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. And it is a pleasure to be on this call this morning. As said, my name is Maggie Williams, and I work for the Pathfinders, which is a cross-regional member state-led multi-stakeholder coalition focused on what it means to actually advance peace, justice, equality, and inclusion at different levels. And we do this through three grand challenges. One is through justice for all. The other is through addressing inequality and exclusion. And the third is through violence reduction and prevention. So as you could see, there was a lot that I really gained from reading this report, and a lot that dovetails with our work. So at the outset, I just also want to say that I'm grateful to be here. I'm grateful to have worked with DESA and the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government before, including recently through the Rome conference and actually on a panel on gender. So those are my sincere thanks. And then the second thing I wanted to just kind of note at the outset is actually how timely and user-friendly I found this report to be, which is great for a UN report. It has, it's full of actual kind of concrete examples, tools, recommendations, lessons learned, but the way that the report is structured and organized makes it very accessible. So the tables at the end of the chapters on kind of actionable recommendations, or the 23 contributions from experts like the ones on this call, just made the report quite easy to parse through. And so I make big kind of thanks for that. And also congratulations to all the experts on this call. And the other thing that I really appreciated about the report was that it was forward-looking. So while it kind of sets the scene, it provides a background, in terms of increased polarization and division, misinformation, disinformation, growing inequality, shrinking civic space, general breakdown in social contract. It inherently is trying to say, okay, well, what can we do now? And what can we do in the second half of the 2030 agenda? So there's a timeliness, there's an urgency, there's an accessibility that is all kind of interwoven into this report. And I think it really focuses on, obviously, on the role of institutions, the interface between people and governments, and the kind of functionality internally and externally, including it with partnerships with civil society, and how this kind of functionality can be improved to build trust, as we've heard already, improve service delivery, better deliver the SDGs, and also address deeply systemic issues long present before COVID, but exacerbated by COVID, whether that's related to inequality, injustice, or gender, as Muge mentioned earlier, as well as Rolf. So the report's quite strong in drawing out specificities, while also being honest about what are controllable variables and what are not controllable variables. And I also thought that was really useful because it's a bit deeper than just kind of a line of, the a silver bullet, if you will. So I thought I would, in the interest of time, I have a tendency to talk, so I'm going to try to not talk too much. I just thought I would pull kind of from the 3 chapters, particular contributions that I thought were quite interesting. And I did not consult with the other experts before this call on what I'd pull from, but apparently there's quite a bit of overlap. So the first one I did want to actually address is the contribution on e-justice. So as I mentioned, the Pathfinders works on people-centered justice, people's justice journey, meeting people where they are and where their justice needs are on a daily level. And I thought that Sarah's contribution here was quite useful, also again, because it highlights the importance of the current window that we're in. So how can you actually institutionalize the gains that have been made in a way that doesn't just mean putting everything online, but rather that also changes kind of the approach so that people's daily justice needs are actually at the center. I had more to say about that, but we've already discussed that particular contribution. And then in the chapter on trade-offs and synergies, I also really appreciated this chapter because I think a lot of people talk about trade-offs and synergies, but then there's no kind of follow-up in terms of what to do with that. And so there were actually two contributions. One was from Rolf, and the other one was from Ole, both of which have already been mentioned in the call. But what I appreciated was the component of risk assessment, and then also the importance of kind of open, transparent, and inclusive as a means of building trust over time. So it has to do with the ASG's comments at the beginning on trust begets trust, but that this is not like a short-term game. And there's a very kind of participatory back and forth nature to it. The other piece within the chapter that I also appreciated was the reference to VNRs. As we all know, SDG 16 is under review this coming year. So the idea of the notion of getting specific on trade-offs and real about trade-offs in the lead up to the VNRs and what can be done in terms of accountability and implementation following from that, I really appreciated. And then on public sector, on chapter 3 and on public sector innovation, I thought the contribution from Fox was quite useful because of the notions of institutional resilience and state society synergy. So again, intergovernmental coordination and coherence is not a new idea. But the notion of having of what's the ingredient that will actually sustain kind of a change in an approach and a change of operationalization, and this notion of state society synergy, I found really quite useful. So I've lost track of my own timer, so I don't know how many minutes I've spoken for. But I wanted to again say I think my role here was to really reflect on some of the contributions that most spoke to me and what I kind of thought overall of the report. So kudos again to David and his team, and really looking forward to where this report goes and its uptake. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. And I also lost track, but I was just engrossed in what you were saying. So, but we do have time for a few questions because everybody was so well disciplined in their timekeeping. So I'm looking through. We have several questions in the chat, and I think I'm going to try to cluster them a little bit so that we can kind of cover them all. There are a couple of questions related to trust. First question. Might rebuilding trust be a result of good policies rather than something we can strive for separately? So I think this is something that you've touched on, but can you kind of address that? How can we, how do we build trust? And we can't just kind of build trust in a vacuum. It has to do with kind of reactivity and that type of thing, and how impactful different citizen groups are, or different committees are, and how responsive government is to them. But anyway, I'll let you answer that. So first question, is trust a result of good policies rather than something you can strive for separately? Also related on the topic of trust, further to Rolf's emphasis on justice systems, but concerning bureaucracy overall, it is very important to deal with the legal status of refugees, immigrants, and foreign workers, their employment rights, inclusion, etc. And isn't their trust also necessary? So related to trust, how do we build trust? And then how do we also build trust with particular marginalized groups? And how do we address that challenge? So I'm just going to open it up and have kind of a free flow. Whoever wants to respond, please just go ahead and speak up. Anybody? Rolf?
And I go for, someone has to start. I thought those are really very important questions, trust, but let me be, in the interest of time, be short. See, I think we have put when we speak about how to build trust, very much emphasis all the time on delivering what was committed and promised in terms of services and goods, and of course also the qualified sort of public goods. I would submit that this report puts rightly so the emphasis on process, and that means participation becomes, I think, a very critical input into building trust. Whether this is in terms of making decisions under constraints, be it budgetary or really competing objectives. But when citizens, stakeholders in general, understand and see how the process goes so that you have an understanding of why the decisions were taken as they are taken in the end, I think makes a big difference. And when I saw the reference to our migration incoming people, I have to say that is exactly where, you know, we miss the principle if we don't ask those people what they need first when they get to a country that they have chosen for many, many different reasons. If we don't really consult with them, sounds maybe a bit strange, but that's what it really is, then our responses will be not very spot on. And therefore, I think I can only say one has to think much more about how to organize these processes. And let me put that forward, that suggestion. Pulling in people by order them in rather than building their interest is, for example, one of those things that I don't think will work very well. If I tell someone to come and participate in a consultation, rather than say, goodness, yes, I have an interest, I would like to be engaged, I want to do something, then the quality of this deliberation will be different. And some of the examples that we know in countries show exactly that. And only to underline again, if you don't then follow as a government of what has been deliberated about and what are the recommendations, that's of course killing this instrument in its infancy. And that's a really unwelcome, I think, way to go about it. So policies, yes, delivery, but process, yes, equally important. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Any others want to comment on the trust? May
I just continue to build on what Rolf said. I think process is important. Policies are important, but I'll come to from a different angle, and I'll suggest that the representativeness of the public institutions matter greatly. And I do not mean this entirely from a gender perspective, albeit that is absolutely important. I think the more we know and we commit to making our public institutions be representatives of the publics they are meant to serve, I think that's where we change the direction of the service, that publics do not serve the institutions meant to serve the people. But if they're not, people are not, diverse sets of publics are not represented in the policy making, the process, I'm afraid, doesn't even get started because we do not even know what questions to ask. We need to get out of that uniform decision-making look and behavior of the public institutions. Thank you.
And I would add to that, policy, process, representation, and outcomes, being accountable for the outcomes. Without actual outcomes, without accountability of decision-making for vulnerable populations, it's very hard to sustain the trust cycle. And this is the point that I want to make when I call for institutionalized organizations like the National Audit Office that kind of build into the cycle of policymaking to embrace deliberately the representation model, the participation model, and to ask for outcomes into the policy cycle process. So this way we can close the cycle, connecting with the resources, with the financial resources. Thank you very much.
Excellent. I think we have a couple more minutes, so I'm going to move on to the next kind of cluster of questions. These are related to digital transformation and digital technologies. So how has digital transformation impacted the public sector's ability to deliver services and address societal changes? And what lessons can we draw from the report in this regard? I'm going to just add on the next question related is looking at digital technologies and how they can be accessible to marginalized populations and looking at the African context. So kind of how are, how can digital transformation improve services, and then how can we also ensure accessibility to marginalized populations and on the African context? So in a couple minutes, like 30 seconds each, if you want to.
Okay, maybe I'll start this time. So I think one of the most important things about is like what I have learned through report and through our research is the e-government, how COVID has kind of expanded our horizons in terms of what we could possibly expect from our governments to deliver when we're not face to face. But it also put them into this position that they themselves, the public institutions themselves, need to invest not only in the infrastructure, but also the way that they're going to foresee service delivery in a e-fashion, which means, for example, when a lot of workers are working in a telework environment, we're going to need new leadership, new managers to understand and evaluate the process, evaluate the role of the public servants, how they're doing what they're doing. So there is few governments that are committed to doing that. And I suspect if we are really serious about closing the digital divide and making sure the governments lead the way, walk the walk, talk the talk, we're going to really need better examples of how this e-service delivery will require other components, not just delivering. I think Valentina put a great example of using drones, delivering vaccines. There are all kinds of service delivery ends of it, but I'm thinking more like quality services. How are we going to manage the quality? How are we going to make it accessible? And that will require government investment. And I think the e-justice is a great example to kind of, it's a great promise, but it is going to take investments to deliver that promise.
Thank you. Yeah, back to putting your money where your priorities are and making things happen that way. Any other comments on the digital? We have a few seconds.
Could I just add, I think this was fantastic, maybe what you said about what it takes. I'll just say that, e-justice really needs also to invest in preparing people actually to go to the justice system. What people know, seriously, what is the degree of information of what it means to ask for justice in the case where you don't even know what your rights are, and where really even institutionally where you have to go and what you need to do. So I think there is really a necessity and urgency, I would say, to make citizens aware, in a way enable them to understand what the justice system can do for them, rather than just saying, I have to wait until someone comes by and wants it. You need to tell them what it is all about, that I can actually go and look at justice as a very relevant service. And I have a right to get that service. Thank you.
Any last, or we can end there. Maggie, did you want to?
The only thing I would say to this, and thank you, is just to say that I think part of this has to also is kind of a rallying cry for greater partnerships with non-state actors, including in the e-justice delivery. I think it's something like less than 20% of people seek justice using formal justice systems. And so the notion of kind of being able to go online, understanding what people's needs are, but then also understanding that there are different service providers that can be then linked in order for people to address those needs in a way that's sustainable would be quite important. That's it.
Excellent. Yeah, a perfect kind of final example and segue from Rolf's comments. So yes, the idea that governments should be, we should be proactively informing people of what is out there and working with stakeholders and nonprofits, et cetera, to help with that process. So we are very close to on time. We're going to wrap it up here. Thank you all so much. This has been such a just rich and informative session, very, very thought-provoking, and I learned a lot. I'm very excited about this. So I want to thank you all for your contributions, and I also want to flag that this is actually the first in a series. So following this webinar, we will have separate webinars for each of the chapters in the report. So I encourage you all to kind of stay tuned and follow, keep your eyes on our channel for those future webinars. And thank you so much for the experts here that participated and to all who contributed to the report. And thank you for joining us today. And that's it. See you next time.
Thank you.